New York City, 1974. The rain falls on a marquee that carries a title the whole country already knows. Inside the theater, the seats are full, and somewhere in that crowd, a woman is watching herself on screen and feeling nothing but dread. Her name was Linda Lovelace. The world knew her by another name entirely, and the film she was watching, the sequel nobody asked for, the production nobody fully controlled, would become one of the most revealing stories in the history of American independent cinema. Not because of what ended up on screen, but because of what happened behind it. This is the making of Deep Throat Part 2, and the real story has never been fully told. The director who made the original film had walked away, or been pushed out depending on who you ask. The studio was operating under the shadow of a federal obscenity prosecution. The lead actress had returned to a world she was quietly trying to leave behind, and the result was a sequel that revealed, more than any other production of its era, exactly what happens when commerce overrules art and what the cost of that trade-off looks like on the human beings caught in between. To understand why this film matters, you have to go back to the beginning. America, in the early 70s, was a nation rewriting its own rules. Watergate had shattered public trust and power. The old cultural codes were fracturing in real time. And in the world of independent cinema, a generation of filmmakers was pushing against every established boundary, convinced that the screen was where the real conversation about freedom was happening. Into that landscape stepped Gerard Damiano, a former hairdresser from Queens with no formal film training and an instinct for cultural provocation. His 1972 underground feature had been filmed in 6 days on a borrowed budget. Within months, it had appeared in mainstream cinemas, generated celebrity endorsements, triggered think pieces in the New York Times, and earned an estimated $600 million worldwide. It wasn't just a film, it was a cultural Rorschach test, and every institution in America, from federal prosecutors to feminist scholars, had a different reaction to what they saw. By 1973, Damiano was both the most celebrated and the most legally threatened independent filmmaker in the country. And the pressure to make a sequel was immense. What happened next would define and ultimately fracture an entire era of American independent cinema. Linda Lovelace was born in the Bronx in 1949, the daughter of a strict Catholic family who moved to Yonkers when she was still a child. By every account from those who knew her then, she was quiet, gentle, and deeply uncomfortable with confrontation. She was not, in any recognizable sense, the bold and liberated figure that the marketing machinery of the early 70s would project onto her. She was a young woman who had been shaped by the forces around her forces that, she would later say, she did not fully understand until it was too late. By 1974, her face was among the most recognizable in the country. She had appeared on mainstream talk shows. She had been profiled in national magazines. She occupied a position that had never existed before, a figure from the underground world of independent cinema who had been beamed, without warning, into the center of mainstream American culture. But the woman who walked onto the set of Deep Throat Part 2 was not the woman the producers thought they were hiring. She was exhausted. She was resistant, and she was, quietly and with great personal courage, beginning to find her own voice. The producers didn't see it. They saw a name, a marquee, a guaranteed return on their investment. They were wrong on every count. Damiano's departure from the sequel was, at its heart, a philosophical break. He had made the original as a provocation, a deliberate act of cultural boundary testing driven by genuine creative risk. His vision for the sequel was not a repeat, it was a subversion. He wanted to satirize the censors, mock the political climate, and prove that independent cinema could operate entirely on its own terms. The producers wanted a product. Damiano wanted a statement. And when those two visions collided, the producers won. In his place came Joseph Sarno, a veteran of low-budget genre filmmaking, efficient and methodical, with no interest in philosophical ambition. The result was a production built on commercial calculation rather than creative vision, and it showed in every frame. Deep Throat Part 2 was released in 1974, carrying the most recognizable title in underground American cinema, and audiences could immediately sense that something essential was missing. Critics who had grudgingly acknowledged the original's strange cinematic energy now used a single word for the sequel: hollow. The box office reflected it. The cultural conversation ignored it. And in that silence, something larger was ending. In 1980, Linda published a memoir. In it, She made a series of claims that sent shockwaves through every community that had spent a decade debating what she represented. She alleged that her entire career in the public eye had been conducted under duress, that the image of liberation and self-determination that the media had projected onto her was not just inaccurate, it was the precise opposite of her lived experience. The people who had held her up as a symbol of freedom were forced to reckon with something far more uncomfortable, that they had never really been watching her at all. The legal system never fully resolved her claims. The truth remained contested. But what is not contested is this. Linda Lovelace spent the final decades of her life as an outspoken advocate against the exploitation of vulnerable people in any industry. She testified before government commissions. She stood alongside legal scholars and human rights advocates. She became, in a remarkable act of personal transformation, the most powerful critic of the world that had made her famous. She died in April 2002 in a car accident in Denver, Colorado. She was 53 years old. What Deep Throat Part 2 reveals, beyond its commercial failure, beyond its fractured production, is a truth that applies to every creative industry in every era. When the people with the vision are removed and the people with the spreadsheets take over, the audience always knows. They may not be able to articulate it, but they feel it, and they stop watching. Damiano understood this, which is why he walked away. He spent the rest of his career in independent cinema, never again achieving the cultural impact of his early work. He died in 2008 at the age of 84, remembered primarily for a film he always believed deserved to be understood as something more than what the world reduced it to. And in that bittersweet legacy, in the gap between the film that changed American culture and the sequel that commerce turned hollow, we find the real story this production has always been trying to tell. Linda Lovelace once said that all she ever wanted was to be seen as a human being, not an icon, not a symbol, not a talking point in someone else's argument about freedom. She deserved that. She earned it. And the fact that it took the world so long to give it to her is perhaps the most important part of her story. In our age of algorithmically manufactured fame where images are built, projected, and discarded faster than ever before, the story of this production asks a question that has never been more relevant. Who controls the narrative? And what happens to the people when the cameras stop rolling? What's your take on this forgotten chapter of Golden Age cinema history? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We read every single one. Subscribe if you want to go deeper into the untold stories that shape the world of retro film. And we'll see you in the next one.
Lace, you're not supposed to read this. This is Mr. Larry's confidential report. It's not nice to poke your nose into patients' private parts. The fancies. The wetness. The black legs. And besides, you have high enough hands already without reading that.